In this video, we'll be setting up a virtual environment. Virtual environments come in handy as you gather or create more and more Python projects. And what happens a lot of times is the project that you're working on is tied to a specific version of a library or has different versions of different libraries. And it can become difficult once you have many different projects that are dependent on different things. So it's best to isolate your Python environment, depending on the project, of course, into a specific virtual environment. That way the installation of one app does not interfere with that of the other. And we can keep different versions of different dependencies, just keep them completely separate. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a new project. So we need to create a folder. And we'll just call this new proj. And we'll go ahead and cd into it. So we need to use the virtual environment command. So we just need virtual env. And we're going to be using Python 3. So actually, let me just erase this real quick. And what I'm using is a version that was installed using Homebrew. And I'm using 3.6.4. So when we set up our virtual environment, because we use Homebrew, there's a couple things that we have to do. And we're going to be basing off of Python 3. And one thing that we need to do is we need to pass the always copy flag. The reason why I do this is every time Homebrew, what it's going to do if we don't pass this in, it's going to create a bunch of symbolic links to the Python version. So the next time that Homebrew releases, let's say 3.6.5, for example, all those symbolic links are going to break, and then your virtual environment will also break. So if we pass the always copy flag, it's basically going to maintain its own version of Python. It's going to copy everything into a bin folder. Let's go ahead and run this. Okay, now once this is set up, we have to activate this version of Python, because if we just go ahead and check which version of Python that we're using, we're still using the Homebrew version that was installed using Homebrew. If we activate this, our terminal, the version of Python that it's going to use is going to change. Okay, so you notice that our terminal has changed a little bit. So we got the virtual environment on the very left of the command line. So now if we check which Python that we're using, and we don't need to use Python 3 anymore because so all we need is Python and it's connected to that virtual environment. But it should be the same version if we double check that, which it is. And the version of pip should also be from the virtual environment, which it is. So what I'm going to do now is install a couple of dependencies. And let's just make just a plain boilerplate Flask application. And just have another dependency. We'll install Flask Bootstrap. Yeah, it's like I spelled bootstrap wrong. Okay, at this point we installed a couple dependencies using pip. What I'm going to do now is just create a new file. Call this app.py. And then we'll just go ahead and open our editor. And let's open our file. And I'm just going to paste in some boilerplate code. Obviously Flask is not the scope of this tutorial, so we're just going to leave it at that. And let's go ahead and run this. Okay, and looks like we successfully installed Flask, and it's running on our localhost port 5000. And I'm just going to go ahead and kill this for right now. So we have an application that is working and has a couple dependencies. So what we can do at this point is freeze our dependencies. That way if we commit this to GitHub or Bitbucket or wherever our source control is, somebody else can pull this repo and be able to install the exact same dependencies. So we're going to use the freeze method. And we're going to output that to a file called requirements.txt. And then if we switch back to our editor, and we can see that not only, so we have Flask and Flask Bootstrap, which we installed manually. However, they have some of their own dependencies, which also got installed. So if this were to be committed as a git commit, then this list of dependencies they would be able to install based on this. During the setup, what I also like to do is create just a git ignore file. So as this currently stands, we have a couple of directories here. We have the virtual environment, and then we also have PyCache. So I always have a boilerplate git ignore, but and it always consists of, at a minimum, it always consists of a few things, including PyCache, venv. So if we were to commit this, then everything that's important would get committed, and then the virtual environment, as you can see, there's a ton of stuff in here, so we do not want to commit that using source control. So that's pretty much it. So what we're going to do next is pull in a repo and install the requirements. This will be a different project altogether. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to pull this project. This is a domain whois lookup tool that's written in Python. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the URL and then go back to the command line. Okay, so we're just going to do a git clone. So we have a new folder, PyDomainTools. Let's cd into that. And so we do have, so we're in a different project now, and then there's no virtual environment in here. And we do have a bit of an issue. We're still in this old virtual environment. So if we check which Python we're actually using. So we're using the one for the test project that we had set that one up on. So what we need to do is we need to deactivate this virtual environment. And so we use the deactivate command, and notice there's no virtual environment set up. So we just clone this repo, and there's a list of requirements. So if we open that up with our editor, and so there's several different requirements in here. So let's return back to the command line, and what we're going to do now is install all of those, but first we need to set up a separate virtual environment. And since we're using Homebrew, we're going to use the always copy flag. And once it's loaded, we can go ahead and activate. And we can check which Python we're using now. And we're using the one that's inside of our project. So now we need to go ahead and use the requirements.txt file to install the dependencies. So using pip install -r, so that gives us all the dependencies that we need. And then if we go back to the website, we can see there's so the usage is we need to pass in a URL that we want to pull up the whois domain lookup. And let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to be getting all the data for google.com, and what it's going to do is output to a text file. And if it worked properly, we can go back into our editor. It's like our files folder didn't sync with our editor here, or there's a refresh. Not sure. So if we do an ll on files, so we've got this here. Let's as we can see, we got the URL with the IP address, and then all of the whois information. So it looks like everything worked properly. And so that is how you set up a virtual environment, install a bunch of requirements, be able to save those and make your project portable through source control, and then being able to check it out again later as a new project, be able to install all the virtual environment with its dependencies to get you back to where you were. Thank you for watching.